What if I escape with you? What if I escape with you? What if I... To start, I'm going to introduce her conversation partner and then the lady herself. Ethelbert E. Miller is our conversation partner tonight. He's a literary activist and author of 2 memoirs and several poetry collections. He hosts WPFW morning radio show On the Margin with E. Ethelbert Miller and hosts and produces The Scholars on UDC TV, which got a 2020 Telly Award, so they know what they're doing. Yeah. His latest book is How I Found Love Behind the Catcher's Mask, published by City Point Press. And now to the lady of the hour, Alexis De Veaux. Yeah, go ahead. So she is a Black, queer, feminist, independent scholar whose internationally known work is published in 6 languages. She's been publishing fiction, poetry, plays, memoirs, and children's literature since 1973, and her work is anthologized in numerous collections. De Veaux is the author of Yabble and Warrior Poet, a biography of Audre Lorde, and was tenured faculty at the University of Buffalo, Department of Women's Studies, more than 20 years, okay, mentoring a new generation of interdisciplinary scholars of Black, feminist, and queer studies. We are here today to celebrate her most recent addition to the portfolio, JesusDevil, The Parables. And I'll leave it with some final words from Adrienne Marie Brown from the foreword. As Alexis sent me the JesusDevil parables she had written to that point, I read them immediately and asked for more. I felt like I had won a literary lottery for my soul. So here's to us finding out just what that means. Let's go ahead and give them a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you all. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
It's wonderful to be here with you all tonight and also to be with my dear friend Ethelbert Miller. We've known each other a long, long time, since the early 1980s. And I was with you about 9 years or so ago here in DC at the Martin Luther King Library. We were celebrating, the book then was Yabo, so it's wonderful to be back with you, Ethelbert. And I want to say a special shout out to one of my Buffalo people, whom I haven't seen in quite a long time, Henri Reckney, back there. Henri is a former graduate student of mine and a dear friend. And so I'm excited to see her here, as all of you. I'm going to read tonight from JesusDevil, The Parables. I'll read one of the parables, and then Ethelbert and I will talk, and then we'll have time for talking with you. Correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. JesusDevil, The Parables. Oh, I have to say this. The cover of this book is a photograph by the Nigerian queer visual artist, Sakari Akine, who is sitting right there. And Sakari is the love of my life. So I have to let you know that the cover is her photograph. JesusDevil, The Parables centers upon the life of a Black queer spirit who lives in human form. And the spirit's name is Fhill. And Fhill has 9 different experiences, which are the 9 parables. So I think I'll read from the first parable. And this is called Girl Negro. She was tired of living these Black lives, hurting that hurt. But what other kind of life was available to her, if not the one in 1739 and the Stono Rebellion, South Carolina? Why hadn't she come back as different? What was the chance she could? What was chance anyway, if not a galactic event? Serial happenings, spontaneous combustion, but the galaxy belches in its spit. The eventful, uneventful eruption of billions of years, and how many encounters with chance did the galaxy afford the syntax of a human life? Heard of and in the body when she was 28, in that 2015, hanged in a jail cell in Texas. What did chance deracinate in the body? What disemboweled from a life? In the body was the counterpublic, she, in the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, 1963, Birmingham. Where was the sanctuary from? The disparity in pain, even living in wealth. And that was the archaeology of the hurt in Live Oak, Florida, when she drove to the office of the Dr. Clifford Leroy Adams, the white prominent, who'd sired her child, Loretta. That hurt, raped her, a well-to-do mother, for years. So she entered through the colored entrance, the sanctuary from, with her 38. Shot the assumption of white men's paramour rights to Black women's sex. Shot that 1952, dead. In a year that was unrecorded, she was an artifact in an archive of rampant, pollutant spread, of a cancer in the body politic she escaped from on foot, through the insect and snake and black bear infested dismal swamp between North Carolina and Virginia, all the way to the Free State, Pennsylvania, with the sickly woman she loved carried on her back. Black lives and the centuries of Husalank, captivity and forced labor and strange gods and fields and fucked and starved and used for and shack houses and lynched and newspaper walls and made and raped dreams and shot down and lack and centuries. Husalank, my descendants, centuries, and when it gonna stop? And now it was this 1948 life, this sex girl, color or race Negro on her birth certificate, the prominent doctor's handwriting in the penmanship of the state. No family story of named after or looked like before her comeback as. She was a monstrosity. Her mother's last name, hers now, but no given name for her. Her father's information left blank. He was invisible or worse, non-existent. Girl Negro, the stamp of an unworthy life. But she had the ancestors' kiss, so what they dreamed, she dreamed, and she worked the dream. She sucked up an underground railroad of rupture, of rhizomatic Black pain in these bodies that had been her life. It was a story of the body of the body. It was a tale of Hosmises. So she made up this Black out of the technologies of her inheritance. Black, poor, pussy. Her Black was a homemade aesthetic, shared with her dead uncle's shoe sign box, his boyhood dream of wealth and freedom, painted Black like her. She cherished it and what it held together all these years, its body, the cans of polish, the shine cloths, and the brushes she identified with his dedication to beauty, present now more than ever. In her uncle's eyes, she saw her own muscle, the refusal to accept a less than life. That was beauty. Beauty was there in the planet's imagination. Those fresh roses on her dining table, always the means to come and go. How she carried herself, head up and eye to eye in public. That was beauty. Something good to eat week after week, $1 in her pocket and $2 in the bank. Rampant beauty. She was alive, alive. But it was not just her life she was living. She was living Black remember. And so she, and through her, we thrived. In spite of the palimpsest, the metastasis of the white. Thrive, that was beauty. The antidote to the cartographies, the chaos of these lives, the cumulative impact of them since 1619, compounded by brutalized, and time compounded by pain. Because we were by our persistent living the provocation. Fhill was not a pessimist, but neither could she invest anymore in the fuckery hope. Hope had disabled Black people. Some talked about Black Lives Matter. They did not, she knew now. She'd lived enough of them across enough time. Black lives did not, never did matter as life forms in this place. Hope was a distraction, and its opposite was printed on her favorite t-shirt like a Black sermonic text. We out, Harriet Tubman, 1849. And still, in spite of all her efforts, it had come to this. You're depressed, Oral said. It was always something when her mother called. It was tiring being her mother's mother. You really think that's it? Fhill said. Her breath rattled. Yes, Mom, Oral said. You've been spending too much time alone. Phil's heart raged in her chest, a wild, captured thing. I don't think I'm depressed, she said. I don't think Black people are depressed. We do get depressed, Oral countered. Yes, I know, Fhill said, but that's what it looks like from the outside. Though the outside and the inside were independent, they co-created each other. Inside us, she thought, Black people had known more than our share of human suffering. Our suffering had enormity. It had an expanse, an intensity so devastating, we lived sicker and died younger. Life frustrated, murdered our possible. And what we suffered was non-catastrophic. Suffering did not strike us with the quick of the lightning bolt. Our suffering was the lightning bolt until death. It felled our grandparents, our parents, and us in succession across genders. So I don't think that's it, Fhill said to her daughter. Mom, Aura put her foot down. Call up one of your friends. Go out on a date. I gotta go. Oral ended the call hurriedly. She snatched up her backpack and keys. She couldn't deal with her mother's anxieties right now. She was horny. Overness, that delicious Black confection, was waiting for her at the Fabulous. The night was already tumescent. Fhill called Emma. Sounds like you're having a panic attack, Emma said. What? Fhill said. An overwhelming fear, Emma said, a sense of imminent danger. She peeked out the kitchen window. Loon, her husband, sat on the shed's roof with Leaf, their youngest, still as the figurine of the cat goddess basked on her altar. The father and daughter gazed at something on the ground Emma could not see. Fhill gazed inward. It feels like a change is going to come, she said. Oh, hell yeah, Emma said. Let's have some Sam Cooke conjuration up in here. Then she crooned into her phone. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. Sing it with me, baby, Emma said. We had some good times on this one. Sing it. It's been too hard a living. Fhill gave in and they sang to each other. But I'm afraid to die, 'cause I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. Fawn strolled into the kitchen, headed for the refrigerator. The teenager rolled her eyes at her mother and mimicked vomiting before she went out again, a bottle of water in hand. Emma laughed into the phone. Oh, you'll be all right, Cher, she said. You just need to laisser les bon temps rouler. I need to get my due, Fhill said. Your due? Yeah, what I'm due. A big life-changing prize or honor, something that recognizes all we've been through over time. All we've been through. Life ain't like that, Emma said. And once again, Fhill peered inside herself. She could see hurt filtering through her liver, in her plasma and blood cells and platelets. The remember that keloided heart and bowels that let her shed and live with simultaneously as it salted muscle to sinew. But the brutal killing of an innocent Black woman by police in her own home that morning, a no-knock invasion, when was the cumulative weight of pain gonna stop? Life ain't one life, Fhill said to Emma. I'll come over and cook for you, Emma said. No thanks, Fhill said. Why not? Emma said. Fhill went silent. And then, because her inside conspired to be heard, she blurted out, I don't even like being human, and I'm tired of living like one. Well, this outburst was no surprise to the ancestors listening in. For some human time, an incalculable measure in the vernacular of the divine, they'd been spectators to Phil's stoic battles with the narrative Black life. They'd absorbed her, breathed with her, kept her going regardless, because life, they believed, desired life. Some of the ancestors, though, the ones furthest from now, cried in collective wonder. If life desired life, didn't life also desire to survive? But didn't death make being alive ever more urgent? Without death, there was no life. Ah, yes, offered the youngest. But how much enmity can a life form tolerate? And now the ancestors began to argue. Did it sound like she wanted to die? Death was an ever-present possibility. Perhaps Fhill thought she'd failed at being alive. That was understandable. Surely, aliveness had a right to fail if it was to be alive. But didn't death urge life to be creative? And didn't life's success include its suffering? Yes, but she'd never said she wanted to die, an ancestor noted. Well, what do she want? They queried each other. Until, after tossing that question about the abundant dark matter, they all finally agreed. Their descendant wanted to transition, not because she wanted to die, because she wanted to be differently alive. And so, when Fhill went to sleep that night, still troubled by her conversations with Oral and Emma, the ancestors granted what they believed was Phil's desire. The human form was not necessary to life, but what it was made of, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur, what she was made of was. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, Alexis, the first question I'm going to ask you is to sort of maybe comment on 6 women who I sort of, when I read your book, I said, I'm thinking of these 6 sisters. And I thought immediately of Barbara Christian, who you mentioned on page 89. But then I also thought of Rita Mae Grosvenor, who I remember on her resume said sun goddess, because she was one of the sun goddesses with Sun Ra. And then I thought of Audre Lorde, who you're a biographer of. And then Bell Hooks and June Jordan, because your book talks a lot about love. And then also in terms of June Jordan talking about bisexuality. And then finally, Jane Cortez, because you have a lot of references to West Africa. And I think of Jane Cortez in terms of her surrealism in her poetry, as well as being influenced by Christopher Kibo and other West African writers. So those are the sisters that I saw surrounding you. And I was wondering whether you want to comment on any of those women.
Wow, that's an amazing orbit to be flying in. So one, I appreciate that, Ethelbert. It's interesting because some of them I knew personally, as in June Jordan and Jane Cortez, and Verda Mae Grosvenor, whose name actually doesn't come up a lot when we talk about Black women writers. But Verda Mae was and is one of the foremothers of what we now call Black culinary writings, and writing about what it means to create Black foods and a menu grounded in culture. So and to follow in their footsteps is quite important for me, and it's humbling to be able to contextualize myself in terms of who they are and who they were and who they will be, because I suspect that all 6 of those women will go on to become very critical to what we call the works of Black women writers and the works of Black queer writers. So I'm deeply honored to have you situate me in that circle.
Okay. Well, one of the things I really like about your work is that I like your decision to create your own language and words. Talk about afiction, talk about the Living Dictionary Project, and third, why are many of the words that you create verbs?
Well, let me start with the third part first.
Okay.
I think that we have to have more verbs in our lives because verbs are doing words. We need to do more. And that's important in this contemporary moment. It goes without saying that we are suffering and having to resist an incredible amount of hate towards us as Black people, as queer people, as people who are thinking, as people who are activists, and everything that we are about essentially is something that is someone on the other side is trying to destroy. So we have to have doing words. We have to have words that encourage us to do, to take action, because that's what we have to do. We have to take action, and we cannot settle for what we have. Not only can we not settle for it, we can imagine that it could be something different. So part of my project with language is to recognize that language is something that we decide, that we make up. And we all know that Black people are at the forefront of making language in this culture. When we tire of how it sounds, we just put something new on the table. And that willingness on our part to reimagine and reinvent and recreate the ordinary, what we call the ordinary or the quotidian, the everyday, is a powerful way that we constantly invent and reinvent ourselves. And so part of my project as a writer, I think, is to, yes, use available language, but also to disturb it, to reshape it. The Living Dictionary Project is actually a project that is founded by my goddaughter, who lives in New York City, in Long Island. And the idea for Ella, her name is Ella Engel Snow, the idea for Ella was to think about a vehicle that we could just populate with new language, with new words. And if you go online, it's the www.livingdictionaryproject.com. You'll be able to see words that have been created by people that are useful for us as we imagine who we are in the everyday. So I love to think of new words, and I love to establish that we don't have to settle for the language that we've been given. And a lot of the language that we've been given doesn't act in our best interest. It acts against us. And it's time to rethink a lot of the concepts that we have out here and to discover and be able to hear new concepts, new ideas that can be even more powerful, that can be even more liberating.
We'll talk about the term afiction.
Afiction? Yeah. I came to understand that term. People have said to me, well, it's a term that you made up, but actually, it's a term that I understand as writing not simply against the traditional notions of fiction, but of writing towards uh, a narrative that is not dependent on fiction, that is actually trying to create a landscape of its own. So a fiction borrows from fiction in terms of things like story and plot, but it dismisses things like character and, sort of over dependence on the things that characters do, because a fiction isn't about characters. A fiction is about how do we bring forward the practice of the spiritual in our lives. We know that the spiritual exists for us. So how do we write it? How do we sing it? How do we embody it? How do we call it forward? How does it call us forward? And that's not what fiction essentially is about. Fiction is about pretty much entertaining us. It's about giving us some place to, for the most part, to escape to. And I'm not looking for the escape to, I'm looking for the escape from. So, and I think, again, we can give ourselves permission to create the forms that we're working with, rather than simply working in the forms that are given to us, like working in the language that is given to us. We can make use of that, but we can also reuse it, and we can also restructure it in ways that are more about our own notions of freedom and our own notions of being human than the forms and the language that we have provides.
Well, talk about symbolism when it comes to your references to color in JesusDevil. What are the many meanings one can associate with the color blue, for example?
That's such a great question. It's such a great question because when we think back to the days of the enslavement of African peoples in the so-called New World, one of the things that we had to do, that we were tasked to do, was to create the indigo dye. So, and that blue would stain us. It would become part of the texture and the color of our skin, certainly by using our hands to create this indigo blue in these huge vats. And that blue actually, if you go to countries in West Africa, you will see indigo. And so we know a great percentage of the Africans who actually were brought to the so-called New World and who ultimately survived. We know that they were West Africans. And I know that in my own DNA, I am West African. So I am trying to, in that, in using blue, the indigo rather, I'm trying to reconnect to an essential spirit, an essential color within the spiritual expressions of those West Africans. And I think that that color is that deep indigo blue.
Okay. You begin the parable Girl Negro with a reference to the Stono Rebellion in South Carolina in 1739. In the parable, The Nigerian Women's Dick, you make reference to other rebellion narratives beginning in New Orleans. Why these historical references to resistance, and how does it connect with your characters?
I think that we have clearly histories of resistance that we need to recall, not just remember, but to recall. And we are living in one of those times, just in terms of the political realities here, where we have to have all the tools that we need, not only to survive, but to thrive and to, as I've said previously, reimagine what this world is going to be. And we have extraordinary histories around resistance, but this society would have us believe that we began in the 1960s in the civil rights movement. And that's not a fact. We began, the histories of our resistances in the New World began when those Africans jumped ship, when those Africans said, fuck it, I'm out. I'd rather be out than be in this thing that you're trying to put me in. That was the beginning of our resistances. And we have to have a long view, because if we have the long view, then we have the tools that we need. And so when we're talking about what does it mean to create a queer reality or gender expressions, we're not the first. I can think of people like William Dorsey Swann in the 1800s who came out of slavery and decided that he was queer, and he lived that way in the 19th century. So none of what we're doing today is new. We just have to remember how long we've been resisting. And I think it's important to raise up resistance, because that's how we have, people say we've persisted. No, we have resisted. We have resisted. And we have resisted going on nearly 500 years. That's a long time, y'all. That's a long time. And we need to understand how long that long has been. And we need to understand who's got our back. Who's got our back as we go forward? We are not alone. We are not sitting on this stage alone. We are not in this room alone. There are spirits and forces in the room that we cannot see, but that doesn't mean they're not here. And part of that has to be for us to understand that our ancestors, not only did they resist, they are still resisting. And it's making our resistances possible.
When one hears the word parable, one sometimes thinks immediately of the gospel. And so, to what extent are your 9 parables instructional? What is the spiritual moral message that you're trying to provide us? New Testament.
Yeah. When I was growing up, I was loved by my grandmother, my father's mother, and my father's mother, Ruby Moore Hill, did 2 things in life. She went to work and she went to church. She went to work and she went to church. She went to work and she went to church. And she raised me up in her church as a Baptist. And my grandmother, Ruby Moore Hill, taught me to read the Bible as poetry. And she taught me to understand the parables in the Bible, both as poetry and as lessons. These were lessons. And part of this creation of this genre, afiction, has to do with attending to the idea of there are lessons for us. There are lessons for us that are out here now, that are being spoken to us, that are being shown to us, that we have only to take in, we have only to claim, we have only to wear, we have only to see, we have only to hear, that will be helpful to us as we move forward. So I think in great part, Ethelbert, a lot of what becomes the parables was not something that I set out to do necessarily. It was material that was given to me, that came through me, that I had to listen to in order to hear it. And as I say in the book, listening became the way in which I understood writing. It became the way in which I understood what the spiritual was about, what perhaps my ancestors talking, our ancestors talking meant, and what was actually being said.
Mhm. You know, storytelling is very much part of African American culture and also African culture.
Mhm.
Your storytelling draws upon ancestral wisdom, but you have stories that connects us to the future.
Mhm.
How do you view time, and is there such a thing as past, present, and future?
Mhm. Mhm. No, there is no such thing as past, present, future. Let's get that straight. Let's start there. When I lived in Buffalo, I had the pleasure of meeting a queer Black minister, Dr. Reverend Gerard Williams. And one Sunday, in his sermon, he said to us, his congregation, he said, "The future is your next breath." And that blew my mind. I was like, whoa, what? And he repeated it. He said, "The future is your next breath." The future is not in the far off distance. The future is the next breath that you take. And so from that point on, and this was sort of the middle 2000s, maybe around 2010, 11, or 12, I began to start ruminating on this notion of time. What is time? Is it linear? No. Is it broken up into past, present, and future? No. If the future is your next breath, then the past is not gone. The past is here, and we can see that. Look around, just in the everyday, you see buildings that were built in 1905. Well, that's the thing that we call the past, but the building is still here. So it's still present. It still lives in the present. And when we step out of this notion that time is segmented like that, first of all, it's a human conception. It's a human idea. If you ask the universe would be like, what? It's so it's a made up reality. So if we step out of that made up reality, we have an opportunity to engage with things that have happened, that are happening, that will happen in a completely different model. And so I am working towards, and I've been trying to do this for some time now, I'm working towards an idea that we can let go of this notion of time as linear. And if we can do that, then we can live, operate, resist in very different and what we call resistive ways. We just got a signal that we have 5 minutes left.
Okay, all right. Well, then I'll ask this last question.
Okay.
How do you view sexuality, and
Mhm.
just talk about the politics of sexuality?
Mhm.
5 minutes.
I think that we humans have been put in a trick bag around sexuality. I think we have been told that there is a sort of normative sexuality, and then there's something wrong with everything else. So what we call heterosexuality is the normative sexuality, and what we call homosexuality or queer sexuality or bisexuality, asexuality, that's problematic. But that model itself is problematic. When we look at nature, we see that nature requires difference. It requires difference. But humans require that we all be the same, and we're not. And so I'm less interested in who's queer than in what's queer, because I think that that's what nature is interested in. Again, nature is interested in difference. So if I have a politics around sexuality, it's that I am for promoting difference, because I think if we have a healthy conversation around difference in terms of human expressions, then we'll have a healthier humanity. But the problem is right now is that we have adhered to a kind of segmented notion of what's sexually okay to be and or do or claim. And I can't participate in that.
Okay, well, we'll talk about getting some participation from the audience if you have some
Okay.
questions.
Mm-hmm.
So any questions from the audience
Or comments.
or comments?
Question, comments, declarations of love, adoration.
Hey now, my name is Nalo. I use all pronouns. I just wanted to say congratulations. I'm
Thank you.
so excited to dig into this project, and
Thank you.
other than loving you, I've been a fan of your work for some time, so I'm excited to see what else you've created, and thank you for this gift. Everything I've heard today inspires me to deepen into what afiction can mean to me, and so I appreciate everything that you've offered us. Thank you.
Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you.
If y'all don't got more questions, I'm gonna let Ethelbert ask the rest of his.
Well, you know, I want to say this, and I was saying this to you earlier, Alexis. When I read the book, I had an appreciation of you as a thinker, you know, a person of ideas. And that's why I was happy that you made reference to Barbara Christian, because, you know, she was dealing with literary theory. And I find today that, you know, people have opinions, but they're not necessarily theory. And so I just wanted to make sure that, you know, people here see you in a certain way that sometimes we're reluctant to see African American women. You know, I remember, for example, June Jordan really being concerned about the fact that, you know, no one asks Black women what they think about in terms of politics. You don't see them being commentaries.
Yeah.
Things have changed to some extent, but,
Yeah.
you know, still there is that sense we need that perspective.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make sure that those of us who read this book take time to look at all the ideas that are in there.
Thank you.
You know? And so that's what all I was trying to do today was provide the audience here with just a guide to things like, you know, look at the color blue when you're reading the book. You know, I mean, there's other colors in there that can be analyzed, but that's what I felt was your book was very rich in terms of material.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate the notion of the artist as the thinker or as a thinker. For too long in this culture, we've thought of artists over here and thinkers over there. And we don't often see the artists working through ideas in order to create the art. So I really appreciate that. I like theory. I don't like theory that I can't understand. You know what I'm saying? And that's why I think the ways that I like theory is to look at theory as a useful reality rather than simply something that gets made in the academy and it's of no use. I remember once, and you raised up Bell Hooks' name earlier. I remember once Bell Hooks said, if you walk into a bar in a Black neighborhood and you can't talk to the people, what use is the theory? If you can't break that shit down so people can understand what's going on, what use is it? Well, what's the point of you studying it? What's the point of you claiming it? And so I like to think of theory as what we do every day. And that's what I say in one of the other parables, the one that mentions Barbara Christian. We do theorize. Black people do theorize all the time, all the time. We be rolling that theory all the time. So we have to claim these spaces that are not generally associated with us or that are not named for us or seek to exclude us. But, you know, when my mother said, you know, I'm your mother and your father, she was theorizing gender way back. I mean, when I understood, I was like, damn, like what? And this is how she would respond when we would say, well, you know, where's my father? And she would be like, shut up. I'm your mother and your father. Deal with that. And so I understood as a child, the notion that one person could inhabit both gender realities, not just both gender roles, but both gender realities. And so this was my mother theorizing gender way back, well before I understood what theory or gender or theorizing gender meant. So I think we come from these histories of theorizing that we don't see in that regard. So we don't give them we don't elevate these ideas to the level that we should.
Talk about seeing. When I first met you many years ago, what impressed me more than your writing was your visual art. Talk about the images that you try to convey. We have your book, but what kind of visual images that you try to convey when you're drawing?
Thank you, Ethelbert. That's a lovely statement. I was fortunate to be raised by a number of Black women artists, certainly June Jordan, as you know, among them, but also the visual artist Valerie Maynard, who passed away last September and left a huge crater for me. But Valerie taught me the difference between looking and seeing. And she taught me to really articulate image in the work as a powerful part of writing. So, and I think I was doing that. Like when we met each other, I think I was doing, but I was unconscious. And so she made me conscious of the visual as an aspect of my work. And I do think in pictures when I'm writing. I do see the pictures, and I want the readers to see the work, not just to read it, but to see what I'm talking about, to see what it means to be Black and human, and to think about that. And I think that's one of the things that this book is trying to do. It's trying to visualize what it means to be Black and human, because that is not a visual we get in this culture. We do not get a sense of Blackness as human. We get a sense of Blackness as disposable. And so I'm trying to both write against the notion of us as disposable, but see us as viable, and not just in the present, but in this space that we're coming to.
We talk about sisterhood. What are the challenges of a Black woman being a biographer of another Black woman? You've done Billie Holiday, you've done Audre Lorde. Are there certain challenges when you sit down and say, okay, I'm looking at this Black woman's life?
Yeah. I think part of the challenge is, again, to address the humanity of that life. In both cases, both in the case of Billie Holiday and Audre Lorde. And by the way, I will never write another biography. I'm done. I am done trying to get to that humanity. I am done. But I think in both cases, one of the things that we had to write against in this culture is the notion that Black women actually are not fleshed, that we're not flesh, that we have been property, we have been rapeable, we have been worked to death, but we're not fleshed. We're not in bodies that are vulnerable, or that are charged, or that have meaning for ourselves in particular, but for those around us. So in both cases, both in terms of Billie Holiday and Audre Lorde, the challenge was to get to the Black woman beyond the legend, beyond the icon, beyond the status of the untouchable, and to try to render her then in some ways that gave us what were the challenges. My challenge was, what were the challenges of Blackness, of womanhood, of artistry, of queerness, of difference in both of those lives in particular.
My last question was, I'm just thinking about this. If we look at the journey that you're on, might a critic say that Yebo was a transitional book for you?
I don't know. I mean, that would be for the critics to say. I don't know. I think, one of the great joys about having lived in this life long enough is that I've done 8 books now. And each project has been very different from the one before. And each project transitions me into the next one, if you will, into the next space. So I don't know, maybe after I'm done here and I'm going on.
Well, maybe we just take time now to sign this book that's here.
Oh, maybe I should.
Thank you.
I'm
very
up.
much,
I'm up
Alexis.
for it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you both so much for a lovely conversation.
Thank you.
Letting our folks know from home, in case y'all didn't know, that camera's not up there just for funsies. If you're tuning in virtually, we're so glad that you could join us here at Busboys and Poets Books. You can get copies of JesusDevil, the Parable, signed by Alexis De Veaux if you order in the next hour from our Eventbrite page. Thank you all so much, and we hope to see you soon. Peace and love. All right.